Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Video Essay Podcast, a show featuring interviews with leading critics, filmmakers, scholars, and other creators about the craft of videographic criticism. I'm your host, Will DiGravio, and I could not be more thrilled to be back here with all of you. My guest on today's show is Philip Brubaker, who many of you may know as a former video essayist at Fandor. Philip is also an experimental filmmaker, documentarian, screenwriter. You name it, Philip has probably engaged in it at one time or another. Philip is also one of my favorite video essay makers working today. His work on Paul Thomas Anderson, for example, is featured prominently in the Video Essay Podcast logo. And he's made video essays on everything from Ingmar Bergman's worst film to, you don't really know Jack Nicholson. Is Quentin Tarantino a feminist? Philip and I talk about many things. We talk about, of course, his introduction to video essays. And we also talk a lot about his time at Fandor. He was hired by Kevin B. Lee to make video essays there, and for a while it was really a dream job for him as he got to work through so many ideas about film that he had and also began building an online audience and engaging with that audience. But then, as many of you know, Fandor kind of nosedived. It's now no longer operating, and Philip talks a little bit about the decline of that company, and he talks a lot about the unfortunate fact that many video essayists like he are still owed money by Fandor and probably are never going to get it. Our conversation is really a good look behind the scenes at what I would call commercial video essay making as compared to scholarly videographic essay making, or maybe someone who's just doing it in their free time on YouTube or Vimeo. And I really enjoyed talking to Philip. Now, the two of us talked about Abandoned Movie, which he doesn't even call a video essay, and he calls an essay film, and I think I would agree with that, even though I'm no expert on essay films. Abandoned Movie is a remix of a documentary called Abandoned that Philip made that treats the original documentary as found footage and then remixes it with clips from movies that are important to Philip. And it's a real stream of consciousness kind of cinephilic journey of Philip's own career as a filmmaker, this past project he had, and he also brings in his own questions that relate to spirituality, his sense of feeling abandoned as a child, and really explores his own past through movie clips. And it's a really compelling piece. Philip has currently submitted the work to many experimental film festivals, and he very graciously agreed to make the project live on Vimeo so that all of you could watch it. He also made available Abandoned, the original documentary that he made. So both of those are available on our website, thevideoessay.com. As I mentioned on the last show, these are longer videos. So I understand if perhaps maybe you've only watched one of them or you haven't watched both of them yet, but I would highly encourage you to go check them out before listening to our conversation. I promise that they are well worth your time. They're super engaging, interesting pieces. Before I get to the conversation with Philip, I just want to plug once again this idea of an opening monologue that I'd like to begin on every show. Like I mentioned in episode 2, before I get to the interview on each show, I'd like to offer dispatches and updates and sort of serve as a news anchor for the world of video essays. So if you have opportunities like video essays that you're soliciting for a journal or a conference or a film festival, or maybe it's Cary Grant's birthday and you really want us to all make video essays and celebrate it, and I can kind of help coordinate that with this platform, please reach out and let me know, and I'd be more than happy to do that. What I have done is I have made a Google form that you can fill out with information on certain opportunities, and that is at thevideoessay.com, and if you go to the tab at the above on Connect, called Connect, you will see information on how to do that. So please send me opportunities, and I'd be happy to plug them on this show. Now, please enjoy our conversation with Philip Brubaker. And now we come to the interview portion of our show, and I cannot be more excited to have Philip Brubaker on, who is one of my favorite video essayists working today. Like I mentioned earlier, I curate video essay guides on filmschoolrejects.com, and it seems like whenever I pick a subject and start looking for video essays, Philip has made one that fits the category. So super happy to have you on, Philip, as our second guest. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
And so I'd like to begin by asking you, what was sort of your introduction to video essays? Talk about, if you can remember, the first video essay you saw and kind of what sparked the interest in making them yourself.
So I'm going to go way back to the
Good.
origin, the origin of the whole beginning of it for me. It was really when I was a kid. I used to watch the Oscars every year, and I remember when I was 10, I saw the opening kind of number to the Oscars that year was a montage by this guy named Chuck Workman, who kind of made a career for himself creating some of the earliest supercuts in film, back in like the late 80s into the 90s. And this is a time before the internet made it very easy to make a supercut. He would be working with the films themselves. I remember watching that montage, which was just a collection of exciting moments from movie history, just distilled into like a 6-minute montage, and getting very excited. And when I was that age, I wanted to make films. I wanted to be a director, but there was something about this masterful edit that also intrigued me. But I never predicted that I would be involved in something like that. Flash forward many years later, I started watching a lot of YouTube when I was in my 20s. And I saw this guy whose username was Behringer82, who would make videos about directors. Like each video was a different director. It would be the films of David Lynch, the films of David Fincher, blah, 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 Coen brothers. And he would just make these like mixtapes, these montages of various scenes from these films. And I could tell that it came from a place of just real love and real kind of fandom about these filmmakers. And I remember he did something with the Paul Thomas Anderson one where he would kind of playfully kind of mash up different scenes. He would have the clip from There Will Be Blood when Daniel Plainview stands up in church and says, "Yes." And then he would immediately cut from that to Tom Cruise's character from Magnolia saying, "No." And like there was something irreverent about him kind of messing with these films and changing them to suit his own needs. That was very attractive. And I just to kind of wrap this up, I became more aware of classic video essay model by watching Every Frame a Painting and Kevin B. Lee's videos. And those I discovered just a few years ago. And then it wasn't soon after that I started making them myself.
It seems like what you're saying here is you're identifying sort of these different groups of video essays which have definitions but are also kind of undefined in a sense, to where it's real fan appreciation but also kind of hard criticism. Where do you consider yourself in the video essays that you make? Do you consider yourself a fan? Do you consider yourself a critic? And I'll add another question to the beginning of that, which is, do you remember the first video essay you made?
Back in like 2010, I was accepted to be a member of Werner Herzog's Rogue Film School seminar. And so that summer was kind of like the summer of Herzog. I went up to New Jersey, and I participated in the lecture, and it was a big deal because there was only 50 people who were accepted, and I felt honored to be part of it. And around that time, I was thinking about Herzog. So I made a Herzog kind of supercut. And I think I was probably inspired by some of what I saw Behringer82 doing, but I did it the old-fashioned way. I rented videos, I digitized the videos, and then I just kind of cut together this piece. And I don't mean to get ahead of myself here, but that video ended up getting me a gig at Fandor years later. So that was probably the first video essay that I ever made. And then when I got into Fandor in 2016, that's when I kind of expanded. But as far as like, do I consider myself a fan or a critic? I don't really consider myself a critic per se. And I'm much more interested in making work than criticizing someone else's work. And when I started making these Fandor videos, I was definitely a fan. And I remember feeling kind of in this weird in-between place of being a fan and a professional.
That's super interesting that you don't consider yourself a critic. What would be the underlying motivation, I guess, for your essays? What do you hope the audience to get out of it? Do you hope that they walk away with thinking, well, this is a guy who really loves this film and that was a really great experience? Or there are some of your video essays that I think aim to teach, and not like in a lecture-y way, but as is saying, there's your video essay about Jack Nicholson where you begin by saying, if you've only seen Jack Nicholson in The Departed, you haven't seen Jack Nicholson, or something like that. And then you sort of go over his career from his first film on, and it's aimed to teach an audience who maybe they have only seen The Departed because they're 14, 15 years old and just getting interested in cinema. So talk a little bit about the audience that you're making for, if you don't consider yourself a critic.
When I was making video essays for Fandor, there was definitely a push or an emphasis to make content that would appeal to millennials and young people who they could, kind of snag and get them interested in their service and whatnot, and kind of grab a piece of that pie. So when I was making videos for Fandor, I felt like I was often one of the only video essayists who was kind of appealing to cinephiles in general, or older film fans, people who liked classic movies from the 70s and whatnot. And I was appealing to that audience, and they let me do that. I was kind of like, that was like my niche. I do kind of feel like a teacher in that regard, because I want to educate people out there who may not know about these films, that they exist and that they're great, and here's why you should like them. Yeah, I guess I feel more like somebody who kind of wants to introduce people to these films and introduce people to a way of thinking about film that's not that common online and not that common at Fandor. And Fandor, as people have said, was at that time, it was the best game in town, which means it was one of the only places to see daily video essays. And a lot of the people who were making work for them were doing really good stuff. So I think that I tried to kind of fit my place within that company by appealing to those who, had ambitions beyond just social media, people who craved movies beyond the what was available on like Snapchat or whatever.
Fandor, of course, is no longer operating, and I'm not really sure what the deal is with the site at the moment. And you've already alluded to a little bit, but could you talk a little bit about, first, what exactly was your role there? What were you hired to do? And, how often were you required to make, things like that? And also speak a little bit to what it means that it's no longer operating.
I'll just start off by saying that my time at Fandor was incredibly exciting, and it was a dream job. And for a while there was a stretch where it was just a dream come true to be able to make video essays for a living. So the way I kind of got involved with them was I saw some of their videos on Facebook. I saw Jacob T. Swinney's Doorway video, which I thought was amazing. And I even saw just this video that was like a recap of what critics considered to be the best movies of the 2000 teens to that point. And it just kind of like something clicked. I was like, wow, this is great. It's like creating a snackable, shareable internet summary of cinema. And I thought, this is wonderful. And I started to tweet at Kevin B. Lee, who at the time was the chief video essayist at Fandor. And I would tweet at him, and he would tweet back, and we kind of developed some kind of a connection. In the summer of 2016, I decided to take a leap and tweet the Werner Herzog video at him. And he said it was great. He said it was fantastic. And he asked me if I would want to adapt it for Fandor. So I'll never forget that, because it was just the most exciting professional news of my whole life to that date. And then interestingly, immediately after that was the kind of the reality of how it works, which was I showed him a 10-minute video to cut it down to 1 minute. And I remember thinking, like, 1 minute? Are you kidding? Like, it's going to totally gut the video. Like, wouldn't you want it to be 10 minutes or even longer? But no, but the thing was, Kevin was operating on behalf of Fandor, and Fandor was in the process of having this total transformation in terms of what their video essays were and what their brand was specifically. They were rebranding, and so I had to kind of cut it down. But nevertheless, I was still very excited, and I was also in the process of moving to California. So in California, after a few months of making 1 or 2 video essays a month and having day jobs, I found out that Kevin was leaving Fandor. This was in like January of 2017, I think. And so when Kevin left, he had a whole bad experience with them, which he's talked about on his own channels and things like that. When he left, I got a call saying that they wanted me to make 8 video essays a month now. So I think
Wow.
with his departure, it opened up some more room for people like me. But I will say this, with not just a little bit of bitterness, I was never hired by Fandor. I and Kevin and all the other video essayists, we were never we weren't employees. Kevin at one time was an employee, but that changed for him. Fandor never really put a ring on the video essayists, so to speak. And we were working for a pretty small amount of money per video, but really doing it out of love for cinema and the excitement of getting your work published and seeing it get feedback. It was like a high. It really was, to kind of see all those reactions to videos that you make. It was really kind of intoxicating.
And you've also made video essays for websites like Mubi. And I'm wondering if you could take us a little bit into the creative process. How does that shape the formal decisions that you will make in a video essay by knowing you are creating a video essay for a popular audience on the web? Are there certain things that you aim to do, certain things that you aim to not do when it comes to, I guess, formal choices? I'm not talking about, the director or the film or something like that.
As I alluded to earlier, the number one thing that we had to do as video essayists for Fandor was to adhere to the brand. And the brand had certain things. You could actually get creative working around it. Like, it kind of forces you to be more creative. But when it comes to a certain point where when you're not only getting, when you're not satisfying the brand, and then you're dealing with the creative team at Fandor, the actual employees whose job it is to oversee the videos. Like, sometimes you get notes from them, and there's just things that you can't always do, things they don't like. And in my case, I think I was kind of getting more interested in being humorous, more irreverent. I remember I made a video for Ingmar Bergman's birthday called "The Worst Film Ingmar Bergman Ever Made."
Yeah, I've seen that.
And it was really just kind of like an attempt to troll his worst film, or what was considered his worst film. Some people like that video, actually. I actually got some fan mail from somebody who said that, thank you for covering a side of Ingmar Bergman that nobody else covers for his birthday. In the final year, I was making videos that were getting rejected by Fandor, some of which I posted on my own channels. So I think I was kind of getting tired of the formula, the brand. I was probably also feeling maybe a little too confident that I could just kind of do whatever I wanted. Because in a way, you could, as long as you follow the brand, as long as you listen to what the creative director says. I had a period with Fandor when I was very, very much kind of interested in what the audience of people out there in social media thought. But then after a while, I think I kind of just started to think, well, I just kind of want to do what amuses me. When Fandor ended last December, I think it was probably a good thing for me overall.
That leads me to my next question, which is, in thinking about, so in our last episode, we had Katie Grant on, who is, of course, an academic. And now she's making video essays, as she says, for a public audience and wants them to be viewed more than, say, an article in a scholarly journal. But on the flip, and there are a lot of differences, I think, between academic video essays and non-academic video essayists. I think the primary one is something that you've mentioned, which is that you have a quota of video essays that you have to meet, essentially, right? And so did you find that to be tiresome, limiting? Did it fuel your creative energy? Was it stressful? I mean, what was that like? Because I can't really imagine having to wake up every day and be told, you have to come up with a video essay in X number of days, and it has to be really good and meet all these things, da, 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 da.
Sure. So that period was pretty early on in my video essay career, if I can say that. And let me just preface this by saying, like, yeah, I was making 8 video essays a month, but that was only for like 3 or 4 months. Mm-hmm. After that, the budget got cut, and so I couldn't make that many. When I had that assignment to make all those video essays, I was ready. I was just like, I was working from home for the first time, and I could devote all my attention to this. I actually had pages and pages of ideas for video essays that were kind of like in my backlog. For that period in 2017, I just dove into that list, and I worked from the list. And eventually, when I had done everything off of that list that I wanted to do, it was harder to think of good ideas. But as far as that kind of frenetic period of 8 video essays a month, I loved it. And I wouldn't want to do it today. But at that time, I was still kind of new to the whole world. I had all these fresh ideas. And I think that I was also working with Jonathan Kiefer as my editorial director, and he was a great inspiration to me. He basically let me do whatever I wanted. And so all these things got greenlit, including a 10-minute video essay about how, the New York in real life and the New York in movies have this kind of cognitive dissonance. And then it's funny, I think maybe at some point the higher ups at Fandor just like weren't paying attention to what we were doing.
Yeah.
So when that 10-minute video came out, one of the higher ups there was like, "Hey, Philip, just want to let you know, we don't really want to make videos this long because, we want people to be able to watch the whole thing from start to finish."
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, I mean, that video essay later got into a film festival in Canada. So I'm happy that those videos I made are still up. I mean, I don't know how long they're going to be up, but I've uploaded a lot of them onto my own channels. And if Fandor's social media presence ever collapses, I can always kind of upload them again. I'm just going to like vent for a second here about this really kind of dark period.
Please do.
After Jonathan Kiefer left Fandor, and obviously, I had misgivings about the company because first Kevin left, then Jonathan left, and David Hudson, one of the writers, left. So yeah, I did kind of have this feeling that maybe this company was not doing that great. But after Jonathan left, we had to have an interim video essay or creative director. And so what they did was they just pulled somebody off of, I think, the marketing team who was not a cinephile, somebody who just didn't really watch movies. So my assignments were like, make a movie about Valerian. There's this cool looking sci-fi movie that's coming out. Maybe you can make a video about that.
I mean, as someone who makes video essays myself, what ignites me most is here's an idea that I've come up with, and I really want to share this with the world and do it justice. And I really can't imagine being told, here's this, like, here you go, like, this is what you have to do. And I mean, I'm sure it's, if it's, Jean-Luc Godard's birthday, you can throw something together that enough. But
I remember now, I pitched nearly everything I made.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a couple of assignments that I got, but really that was one of the best things about it, is that I was able to make these pitches. And when you're kind of going back to the fall of 2018, I was starting to run out of steam with these ideas. But there was a time when I was just kind of really, really active and really kind of feeling very creative. And I seemed to find an audience of people who liked my work. And some of the other things that changed after Jonathan left were I could no longer have my Twitter handle at the end of the video because they wanted to keep everything brand consistent. And found that people on Facebook weren't being as active commenting or reacting to my videos or anyone's videos. And so things kind of seemed to change. I just kind of put all my eggs in the Fandor basket, which Lee Singer specifically warned me not to do. And so when they collapsed in December of last year, I went through this kind of crisis period of having to find work. Living in California, obviously there's a lot of work around if you can get it. But at the time, I just did not expect that I would be cut off like that, and I did not expect that Fandor would actually owe me thousands of dollars either. That they wouldn't pay up, which when a bunch of the video essayists are owed money by Fandor. Some of them like a lot more than me. And when we kind of banded together and reached out to the company that had kind of assumed the liability or whatever for Fandor, they basically said, you're not going to get your money back.
Wow.
Yeah. So that leaves kind of like the worst taste in my mouth around Fandor. But I can't deny the fact that I'm grateful that I now have a stellar portfolio of work that I can, forever show people about what I can do. The fun of it for me was kind of making things that I was excited about and then finding that a lot of other people shared that excitement. So it wasn't so much that I was kind of making it for a demographic as I was just kind of finding that there was a demographic who shared a lot of my interests.
Has the end of Fandor, I mean, obviously you're no longer getting a paycheck and that's horrific that you're still owed money. Has that affected your kind of creative energy? Are you still just as excited about making video essays, or have you turned your attention to other projects, which may be a transition to the next part of our podcast, depending on your answer.
Sure. So yes, I'm not the video essayist that I once was. I don't make video essays that often. I've made a couple since Fandor dissolved, and I've been fortunate to have one of my video essays, which is very mischievously titled Stranger Things, which was shown at a film festival in Madrid, Spain. It was kind of picked up by Mubi. So I think Mubi, to me, makes great video essays, and I love them. I love what they do. And so I'm happy to kind of be involved with them as much as possible. But the video essay world is not like a lucrative world. So I approached Mubi like last year about making more video essays, and they said that they don't have the budget for that right now. So I was able to have something in a film festival, which is something I want to do more of. Like, I'd love to get off of the computer and back in movie theaters. I come from a time when I was in film school, everybody was focused on making movies for theaters. It was in the late 90s, and people were getting excited by movies like Magnolia, Fight Club, and whatnot. And the internet was not the player that it is now in terms of how to get your work seen. So I would really like to get back into the shared experience of theatrical screenings. The kind of work that I do now, though, is more experimental. And some of the videos I made for Fandor that got rejected were probably because they were too experimental, too weird. But now I've kind of focused on experimental documentary, which is kind of like its own essay film called Abandoned Movie. But in terms of, I don't see myself cranking out the kind of Fandor-like content that I did in the past.
And Abandoned Movie is what we are going to talk about for most of the rest of this podcast. But before we get to that, I want to ask you one more question, and that is, I just want to hear the story behind one of your video essays, It's a Wonderful Hitchcock. I'm a Hitchcock guy, obviously, and this is one that I've blogged about at least once, if not twice, at Film School Rejects, where basically Philip takes scenes from It's a Wonderful Life and puts over them Bernard Herrmann's score from Vertigo. Creates a really interesting juxtaposition and kind of really draws on the manicness of Capra's film and Jimmy Stewart in that film. And I'm just sort of wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. And was that published on Fandor? Because that's definitely one of your more far out ones.
That was not published on Fandor.
Okay.
But there is kind of a story surrounding that. I'm really pleased to hear that you're kind of geeking out about that video. And this will probably really stoke your geeky fires even further.
Excellent.
But, so the end of that video essay, if you can recall, we see the shot of the bell ringing in the church in It's a Wonderful Life. But what we're hearing is the audio from the end of Vertigo. Mm-hmm. So at the end of Vertigo, there is another bell that rings with the dramatic Bernard Herrmann music. So Will, the bell hits, those 3 bell hits from Vertigo sync up perfectly with the bell hits at the end of It's a Wonderful Life.
You're killing me.
But anyway, yeah. So
that's wonderful. That's so wonderful.
The story behind that video essay, it's a video essay that I made when I was working on a separate one for Fandor. Mm-hmm. So the video essay that Fandor published that Christmas, which was Christmas of 2017, was more like their style. It was kind of revisiting It's a Wonderful Life to kind of judge how it measures up to today's, Twitter prescribed standards. So it's kind of like, how woke is It's a Wonderful Life or something like that. I remember I got the idea for making an It's a Wonderful Life video when I was watching it with my family over Christmas in 2017. I remember watching it and watching some of these shots and thinking, like, this is kind of a weird Hitchcockian shot here that, when Jimmy Stewart is having his kind of manic episode, there's something very menacing about it. And plus, knowing that Jimmy Stewart did make a fair amount of films with Hitchcock, that there may be something there. But I knew that it wasn't a Fandor video.
Yeah, so you didn't even pitch it?
No.
Yeah.
But I instead made another pitch. And while I worked on that pitch, I was making It's a Wonderful Hitchcock. And I got It's a Wonderful Hitchcock published on my own Vimeo channel.
Yeah. That's a great story. I'm very pleased to it lived up to the hype. That's one of my favorite video essays, and also a beautiful idea that Hitchcock might have been inspired by It's a Wonderful Life while making Vertigo is fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, so now let's transition to the part of the show that I've been really looking forward to. So I want to give the audience a little bit of context here. So basically, I reach out to Philip, as I will with all of my guests, and I basically say, hey, for the second segment of this podcast, I want you to select a video essay of your own, or maybe or we can come to one together that we want to talk about that the interviewee has made. And basically, Philip sent me the link to Abandoned Movie, which is an experimental film that he has made and is making public really for the first time now. You have it in some festivals, submissions right now and such. But one of the first things you said was, I'm not really sure if this qualifies as a video essay. And I think that's the point of this podcast, is to have those conversations. Now here, I'll turn it over to you to tell us exactly what Abandoned Movie is and to kind of give us the history of it.
Sure. So Abandoned Movie is like a video collage that combines documentary footage that I shot over a period of 13 years with manipulated excerpts from famous films. So it is an experimental documentary, but I think it leans also to the direction of an essay film.
Totally.
And I call it an essay film, not a video essay, because I think it goes a little deeper and a little longer into kind of this thesis that I'm proposing as the filmmaker. So I think there's a little bit more at work, which I would kind of say perhaps is less influenced by Jacob T. Swinney and Behringer 82. It may be more like something that would be influenced by Chris Marker or Guy Madden or other people who kind of make these longer, almost feature-length essays into something that's on their mind. So, but specifically, when I sent you Abandoned Movie, I didn't tell you that it was actually an experimental transformation of another film. But that other film is called Abandoned, and that is just a straightforward documentary.
Which is great. You sent it to me as well, which is great on its own right and so enjoyable to watch. And we'll link to both of them, but go ahead, continue.
Yeah, so really, like, I don't think there's any precedent for this. I don't know of anybody who's made a documentary and then made an experimental kind of remix of it. I also should say that I come from a graduate program in experimental and documentary filmmaking. So, and I got that degree, long before I went to Fandor. It's just part of my creative process to experiment and to make kind of work that doesn't follow these norms. But then after I made Abandoned Movie, I showed it to my wife, and she saw a narrative in it. And I said, I think you're right. There is a narrative there. There is, and when I say narrative, I mean a recognizable story. It's not simply just a collection of images. There's something else going on. And I remember a lot of my video essays for Fandor were around the topic of nostalgia. And Abandoned Movie is very much a part of that. There are several films that I include in the film that are all older films sometimes from many decades ago that mean something special to me. And I transformed them to become a part of this collage of other films. And that includes footage that I shot. And the time period when I was filming was between 2005 and 2018. So it was a long-term project. And Abandoned, the documentary for our listeners' benefit, the documentary has to do with an abandoned house that I found in North Carolina and how that discovery and researching the people who used to live there kind of triggered this spiritual journey that I went on. The thing about Abandoned Movie is that the existence of Abandoned Movie has a lot to do with a film that I watched called Camera Person by Kirsten Johnson. And it's part of the Criterion collection. But she's a documentary cinematographer who created this film Camera Person, which was really just a kind of a collection of outtakes and deleted scenes from movies that she shot over the years. And she created this kind of sort of a free form experimental documentary. And after I saw that, I was in a place where I was not done with Abandoned. there's something else needed to happen to it. And I had screened the movie 4 different times over the years publicly, but it didn't, it just didn't gain the traction that I wanted. So after I saw Camera Person, I thought, this is how I have to approach the material. I'm going to approach all of this footage that I shot and treat it as found footage.
Mm.
And then after that, there was this whole other language that just fell into place with how I edited it and how I incorporated the other films into it as well.
I just want to provide a little bit more context. Abandoned, which is the documentary, kind of the big reveal at the end of that documentary. And this is, again, I want to say you should go to thevideoessay.com and watch these videos first, so we'll do a spoiler alert here now, is that at the end of that documentary, you basically find that there was a letter that you had found in the abandoned home that was from, do you want to tell this story? You can say it much better than I can.
Oh, sure. So the setup for Abandoned was I found an abandoned house and I went inside with my camera. And this was a period of my life when I was doing that a lot, driving around the neighborhood, driving around the country and just exploring abandoned buildings. And when I was in this house, I found a letter from 1945 that was sitting on the kitchen sink counter. And it was a letter from a drug company, which is now defunct. And it said, it was addressed to a woman named Hazel Harward. And it was saying that, it's with deep sadness that we learned about the death of your little son. And I remember thinking like, whoa, what's this all about? And it was a letter of condolences, kind of like expressing sadness for this woman's son. And I was thinking, I guess these people are friends, that this business guy would use, his company letterhead to write this woman a personal letter. But then the last paragraph said, the package you have returned has been received and the charge canceled. Thank you for taking care of this matter. Signed, Joseph Hutzel, the CEO of the company. And I remember thinking, like, this is just really weird. Now, why would the CEO kind of write this letter of condolences that turns into a business letter at the end? And what was the package that he received? And I just kind of, my instincts were telling me that there was something going on. There was some kind of a story here. So that was really what set me off on the journey to find out what happened to Hazel Harward and her son and their whole family. Along the way, I hit this wall basically where there was no more information to find. And so at that point, I went inward and I was the film became more introverted, and it wasn't so much about solving the mystery as it was addressing these nagging concerns that I had. Like, why did I find this letter? And there were a series of coincidences that I also felt could have been something more than just a coincidence. Like, for example, the film that I had just finished at that time was a documentary about the National Hollering Contest. Mm-hmm. Now that is a North Carolina tradition. It's a festival. This is the North Carolina where I found the house. And I had just finished that film and I was looking for another project. So when I went into this abandoned house, what do I see on the floor of one of the rooms? A newspaper with an article about the National Hollering Contest. That's 30 or 35 years old. So coincidences like that and other things that I was really reading into caused me to revisit, to put it bluntly, just my own concept of God and synchronicity. Signs from above. What does it all mean? There were other things that happened too that just kind of made me go down this path. And so when I decided to remix Abandoned into Abandoned Movie, the spiritual aspect of the story came to the forefront. And the film became more about basically spirituality, the spirituality of a cinephile, and as well as dealing with some traumatic things that happened to me when I was a kid as well. And this idea of disassociation that happens where you kind of enter a kind of dream state when you're feeling threatened in some way. And I remember the thing that inspired me to start including famous films into the mix. I started with 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the first thing I knew I had to get was the lights from the Stargate sequence. So I would bring in those clips and I would key out the black So all you would see is just the colored lights. And I would layer that over documentary footage that I shot in the abandoned house itself with actors doing reenactments. And then I felt like I had something. I felt like it was still fair use because I still felt like I was transforming the footage.
Totally.
I may not have been criticizing it in a traditional way, but it was still fair use. And so from that point, I had like hundreds of movies on my computer from making videos for Fandor. So I would be like editing a scene, and I would think, okay, I want to pull something else here over this. How about the scene when the guy sets himself on fire from Tarkovsky's Nostalgia? How about I bring that into this scene? And I would do that, and it was super intuitive,
Mm-hmm.
and it was kind of an old school nostalgic approach to making an experimental film where you layer things on top of one another. Like I remember I would I would lay down on the floor and watch Stan Brakhage movies, and then just kind of use that to inspire this kind of collage like technique. Like for those people out there who are filmmakers, I did not use After Effects at all. I was really wanting to be true to this idea of collage where you layer one thing on top of another with a minimal amount of interference or alteration.
And so you were just in Premiere the whole time?
Yep.
This is a perfect segue to my next question. So one thing I just want to add is basically by the end of Abandoned, the documentary, you find out that the reason that this woman in North Carolina and the CEO of the cream company in Indiana were, going back and forth is because this woman was sold, presumably by a traveling salesman, some eczema cream for her child that contained a fatal amount of mercury. And you basically find an old tub of this cream on eBay, and then you have it tested by a lab, and then they find out. And so in the Abandoned movie, the experimental film, you couple that with the scene from Saving Private Ryan, which was mind-blowing, when the general is basically reading the letter from Abraham Lincoln right to a mother who had just lost her son in the Civil War. And it's almost the two letters are almost identical. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I'm very, very glad that came across so clearly because yes, it's amazing.
I mean, the word beguiled, right, is used. Like it's that close, right?
Yeah, and I think what that has to be is the language of the times.
Mm-hmm.
How to kind of be the bearer of bad news via letter. I think that's what it has to mean. The language is, the anguish of your bereavement, beguile you of your grief. Like this terminology, it's exactly the same in the letter from 1945 that I found with this, I presume, Civil War era letter in the film. And yeah, it is very strange. And it just kind of supports the larger idea of the films, both films, which I don't look at it so much as a religious connotation, but just kind of the connotation that everything is connected in some way. And I'm trying to make connections with the films that I choose to juxtapose with the film that I shot, etc. So I think there was that one time when I was younger and I started Abandoned back in 2005 when I perhaps was more questioning about the God's involvement in our lives as human beings. And is God responsible for all these connections that we have in our lives? And now I don't necessarily frame it in those terms. I kind of just live my life and just kind of take note. Yeah, it's quite an interesting coincidence. Believe me, Will, when I found that clip from Saving Private Ryan, after I'd already internalized the text of that letter, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, wow, that's so weird that it's exactly the same language.
You just were you just rewatching Save It Private Ryan at some point? Like,
yeah,
wow, that's unbelievable. And when we were talking before this interview, I said to you, I think The Shining was the most used film in the movie, and you say no, actually it was 2001.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the importance of 2001, especially since it's the most, for lack of a better word, quoted film in your film.
So, Kubrick is my main man. I think he's my favorite filmmaker. He's the one I admire the most. The reason why 2001 is the most quoted film is because it has the most visual flourishes. It has the most visual activity that, these lights, like the Stargate sequence, when you can take that out of context and then, rotate it and zoom in, you can really abstract it. And so because 2001 has so much that you can abstract and keep it visually interesting, I just found myself, I kept going back to it. And there's a part in Abandoned Movie where there's a scene that it mostly focuses on the house in the country, the abandoned house. And all throughout that scene, I layered images of Christmas lights over the shots. That was footage that I did shoot myself, but I kind of got the idea around that time that this feeling of like zoning out when you're watching a film, or the idea of disassociation, period. And I'm not an expert on the kind of the clinical terms, the clinical definition of disassociation, but I found that when I was looking at the footage, I could go to this place where it was about painting. It was about the visual more than it was about anything written. And I found I was just layering clips on top of clips and creating just visual noise in a way. And so because 2001 has a lot of footage that you can appropriate, which is definitely what I was doing, you can definitely kind of change it to suit what you want. That became the film that was most commonly used. There was also something else kind of motivating me too, which was, it's called Abandoned Movie because I was kind of thinking that my own film career may not reach the heights that I wish it would. And there may be a time when I feel like I need to give up on this dream. And so I thought, like, while I was editing this piece, I was going to bring in as many films that I loved as possible. I found that it was just like this enormously freeing kind of aesthetic to be able to just kind of arrange things purely from their visual meaning.
And I want to go back to Kubrick for a second, and I think why, I wasn't tallying how many times you referenced each film, and so I think the reason I just assumed it was The Shining was, even though I don't really even know you at all, this is the first time we're ever meeting, is I felt you in the film. Mostly because you're on screen and you're sharing all these anecdotes, but it's incredibly personal. We get a sense of your taste. In Abandoned Movie, you kind of even add more like documentary type footage is when you interview, I believe, your mother.
Yes.
And you interview your mother about the fact that when you went to your first communion, you decided to not do it. And you don't really know why. And you also talk about this period of time where I believe she went to Poland for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and you sort of felt abandoned when she left. And as you're doing all of this, you are showing clips of, I'm blanking on his name, but Danny is his name, the little boy from The Shining.
Yeah.
You're showing all these clips. And I said, is he associating himself with the little boy and his younger self? And so those for me felt like some of the most personal choices. And so am I wrong? Am I crazy? Talk about that.
Yeah. So no, you're not crazy. So the Shining came out the year I was born in 1980.
Gotcha.
And I think I definitely was drawing an association between, young Danny and young Philip in real life. Yeah. I think that whole kind of exchange between me and my mom at the heart of the film. Yeah. It's certainly kind of addressing something painful about my past, and something that may have caused me some trauma as a kid, just kind of feeling neglected, feeling abandoned. And I think a lot of people who get involved with the electronic babysitter often feel that kind of neglect. I think a lot of us who grew up watching TV and watching movies may identify with this idea that, at the time it can be entertaining to just kind of be fascinated by these flickering lights on the screen. But when you get older and start to kind of figure out who you are and how you relate to people, there could be some work to be done in terms of kind of figuring out your past, your trauma, if there is any. And for me, this is a very personal film. It was something that was I worked on it kind of as a means of self-healing, out of kind of almost therapeutic in some way, which, Norman Mailer said that amateur filmmaking is like free psychotherapy, which it really is, I
Yeah.
think.
That's
And it allowed me to indulge in an aesthetic that I couldn't do by making these 3-minute video essays. And I was able to kind of, but the funny thing is, like, all the music in Abandoned Movie, it's all public domain. It's all Creative Commons. So that is one area that I take very seriously, and I don't want anybody coming after me because of music I used. So I had to find music that I thought was perfect for the story and created the right mood, and was also available.
Now let's transition to the video essay that Philip has selected for us to talk about. And it's an essay that I never seen before. And it's by Vicotira Oliver Farner. And it was published by Mubi. And it's called Peripheral Attention. Philip, since you selected it, I'll let you introduce it. So talk a little bit about basically why'd you choose this video essay?
Sure. So I was very pleased to have one of my video essays in the program at Mubi's Film Madrid, or it's not Mubi's festival, but the Film Madrid Film Festival in Spain has a sidebar of video essays that Mubi curates. So Vicotira Oliver Farner's film was in the same category with me and I think 5 other selections, and they were all video essays. And so I watched all of them, but Victoria's was the one that I thought was just the most brilliant and the most captivating one that I saw. So for what it is, I mean, now that I've seen it, I can tell you that the entire video essay is basically split in half, and it's the beginning of the Francis Ford Coppola film, The Conversation. The first time we see that beginning, which is most of it is one very famous shot, which is shot from above and a camera that gets closer and closer. As soon as the film began, I knew that it was The Conversation, but I didn't know what Victoria had in store for us. Mm-hmm. So as you're watching this shot, the only transformation that's happening is you start to see these black boxes appear on the screen. And they're kind of appearing seemingly random places, and they're obscuring parts of the frame. And in the beginning, it seems like they're obscuring the credits, the actual titles. But then you'll see that no, they're actually not just doing that; they're covering up characters, they're et cetera, et cetera. And I remember just being instantly interested because I absolutely love video essays that don't adopt a narrator or narrative text. So this is a video essay that simply transforms the film, transforms an excerpt from the film. And that to me, as like as a screenwriter, screenwriters are told, you don't do voiceover narration because you want the story to tell itself. So this is not like a traditional story per se. But I was just kind of really intrigued to see what was happening. And then the second half of the video essay is the inversion of what we just saw. And although in this case we see a black screen, and then the boxes that appear throughout the image contain a visual excerpt that was basically redacted from the first half. So it's kind of like, first we see the big picture, and then the second half, we see the smaller picture that we missed in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the redacted, and I totally agree, this is such a brilliant piece, but the redacted image at the beginning seems to be whatever she has decided is kind of the focal point of the shot. Right?
Yes, I think so, because, it's called Peripheral Attention.
Right.
And, when you're watching the first half, you kind of think like, well, this is random. What is the pattern here?
Totally.
But then when you see what she redacted, it basically tells the whole story. It tells you pretty much what you need to know to get the actual scene, to get the important part of the scene.
Totally. And there'll be a point where, Harrison Ford there's that overhead shot and Harrison Ford's running around and he's actually blacked out, and he's running around and the box just kind of follows him.
Yeah,
as he runs.
Gene Hackman, you mean?
Yeah, Gene Hackman. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Good correction. And then, someone will be talking and that will be blacked out. And then, as you say, it's kind of the inverse. And I want to go back to something that you just said previously, which I totally agree with, which is the video essay that does not kind of have text on screen or narration, in that it guides you with its own language. And I think that's what this video essay does so beautifully. Whereas I had the same reaction as you, where I'm like, these black boxes, they seem random. What's kind of happening? Like, I got the idea right away because this idea of peripheral attention. But then as it's going, it's teaching me what it's doing. And by the end, it really feels like an experience. Really.
Sure.
Like, I felt enveloped in it.
Yeah, and I think that there's definitely something about the quality of surveillance. And, I assume you've seen the conversation. I've definitely seen it a few times. So, like, there's this thematic unity between how the video is transformed and how the film itself is, because these characters, Gene Hackman, John Cazale, and his buddies, they're surveilling the crowd. Mm-hmm. And in these times, the black box, as is kind of like a silencer. It's kind of like how surveillance gets censored. And it's also about, like, there's some power greater than Francis Ford Coppola at work here. There's something kind of audacious and something irreverent about Vicotira Farner, just kind of very aggressively and bluntly having her way with this film.
Totally.
And it's this canonical film, and it's very highly regarded, and she's kind of using this masking, which I assume was done in After Effects, to make it into a new film. And that's kind of what I always wanted to do, is, like, I didn't necessarily want to create criticism of movies with my video essays. I just wanted to make more movies. I wanted to make a movie out of a bigger movie.
Totally. And so this, I totally agree. And I would say this essay, if I had to, you can get something out of it having never seen the conversation, but I think it's especially interesting if you have seen it, because it kind of has this it seems to me to kind of be operating in this cinephilia tradition of the wandering eye, and is really trying to get you to challenge that, there are other things that are being captured in the film itself that you aren't looking at. And so
I think that there's one of the most confusing parts of the video is when we see these black boxes, that they're covering up text. And so you think, okay, these are the rules of the video. All the text is going to be covered. And then we see text again, like we see text for the first time, and the black box covers up something totally different off to the side. It's wild. It's avant-garde. It's like, it's like it's not that it doesn't have rules. It's just the rules are way specific to the person who's making it. And I found it to be just, I thought it was very cool. I've actually watched it a couple times. I like just kind of the way that Victoria transformed the footage. Mm-hmm. I like how, I would say she went one more than that. She defaced it.
Yeah.
And I like the irreverence of that. And I think that it does kind of makes you wonder as you watch it, what is the logic here? What are the decisions based on? And then, unlike a lot of experimental or video essays that I've seen, I feel like there is kind of a nice payoff when you do have that like moment of gestalt where you figure out what it's about. It's a rewarding watch. I think that it's very interesting, and I totally thought it was just great.
The strong defacement of it through the striking black box is really asserting her own authorship and her own authority over the video essay, and basically saying, I'm not going to be subtle about this, because the video essay is 10-ish minute, 12 minutes, 18 seconds. For the next 12 minutes, I'm going to take this film in my hands and make an argument about it. And I'm going to change the way that you are viewing it. And I think especially when you're working, as you say, with a canonical film, that's even more important, because so many people are going to be bringing so many different experiences to it that I almost wonder, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, how does it change when you're working with a canonical film versus when you're editing something that is not held in such high regard that people probably don't have such a strong attachment to.
Well, you're more likely to piss people off.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at.
I don't know if I ever did that, but let me just say there's one video essay I made other than the worst film Ingmar Bergman made. That was one of my least popular ones. But my most hated video essay has to be this one called The Slide.
Okay, I haven't seen this one. I'll have to check it out.
It's on
We'll
YouTube.
link to it, don't worry.
But yeah, so it's like with that film, like I believe like one of the first very vocal comments on it just said, "This is bullshit." And that guy got lots of likes for that comment. But yeah, I think like sure, I think it's kind of funny how people on YouTube can be so critical of video essays and feel kind of so entitled that the video essay you make has to follow their brand or their guidelines.
Right.
And like sometimes there's no room for humor, there's no room for sarcasm, which I think is not right. Yeah, I think that the what you just said a minute ago about how Vicotira Oliver Farner was kind of like speaking to us, saying like, I'm going to assert my ownership of this material. I kind of think that's what an essay film is it's when not too many essay films are a collaboration of many people. There's people who can collaborate, of course, but usually an essay film, or at least the kind of ones that I like to make, it is kind of like my voice. It's kind of like me telling you something in the audience, and I think that's really what an essay film is, and how it's different from, say, a narrative. Because a narrative, it's like, tell me a story, and the essay is kind of like, tell me what you think,
right?
Or tell me your thoughts.
Philip, thank you so much for being a guest on the show, and please do keep us updated on Abandoned Movie as it hits the festival circuit going forward, and we'll be sure to share any updates you share with me. I'll be able to share them on our website and social media. So thank you so much.
That sounds great. Yeah, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much again to Philip Brubaker for agreeing to be on the show. Philip, I really appreciate you taking the time and your candidness and your ability to speak so authentically and passionately about why you engage with online audiences, what drives you, and why really you began making video essays. I think there's a lot in there that folks can really take away from if they're interested in doing this kind of work themselves. So thank you so much again. I really, really appreciate it. On the next episode of the Video Essay Podcast, which will be released on Thursday, September 5th, I will sit down with Grace Lee, who you may know from her very popular YouTube channel, What's So Great About That? Her video essay channel has nearly 50,000 subscribers. Many of her video essays have reached the hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube, and truthfully, she's one of my favorite video essay makers working today. What's so interesting about Grace and her body of work is that it really is very different from the video essays that Katie and Philip make. While Katie makes video essays more in an academic space, and Philip was making video essays for Fandor, kind of that were aimed to capture audiences' attention on social media, Grace's are a bit longer and a bit more explanatory in nature. Grace's average video essay time is right around 10-12 minutes, and she really takes one topic and really dives in deep into it, pulling in all sorts of references to other films, to literature, to art generally, to society, and they're really incredibly polished, well-edited pieces. Grace is also an animator, so all of that really influences her work. We will be talking about her video essay, Feathered Foes, Birds and Horror, for our deep dive segment. I enjoy this video essay for many reasons. First, obviously, I'm a Hitchcock devotee, and one of the films that she predominantly explores is, of course, Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. But what's really great about this video essay is that it pulls in all sorts of different cinematic references to birds, and also looks at how experimental filmmakers have used birds, how birds are portrayed in literature, and what they mean to our society in general. So it's a really great piece, and I'm really excited to talk to Grace about it. When I was an undergraduate at Middlebury College, which was like 3 months ago, one of my professors always refused to talk about the homework in class. they always said, go read the syllabus. Go read the syllabus. There's a reason that I put together the syllabus. All the instructions are on there. I'm not going to waste class time answering questions. And so in that spirit, I've decided to not talk about the video essay that I'll be talking about with Grace that was made by someone else on next week's podcast. Instead, I am merely going to say go to thevideoessay.com. Now, this video essay is one of the most popular video essays made on the web, and it is made by two very popular video essay makers, and it is the genre of desktop documentary. So those hints might have given it away, but that's all I'm going to say for now. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and Spotify and leave a 5-star review. And also please follow us on Twitter at Video Essay Pod and on Facebook, the Video Essay Podcast. Thank you so much. We'll see you on September 5th. Peace out.